Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 2 coverage of my games from the 2018 Larry Evans Memorial. In round 2, that round 2 was played at 7 p.m. on Friday. The round 1 was at noon on Friday. I'd had a fairly long game from noon, maybe 3 to 4 hours, but there was plenty of time between rounds for me to get a little rest and to have some dinner. So I came back refreshed and at 7 o'clock ready to play another game. These games can run pretty late, so they can be as long as 6 hours, which would take you to 1 in the morning. And I think there sometimes are a few players still playing there at 1 a.m., but it doesn't happen to me very often. Anyway, my opponent here was rated 1836, and my rating is 1803. So I started off with e4, and he went d6. So this is the way he played here is one of those moves I see more often in blitz than I do in over-the-board chess, although I think it's a respectable way to play. Let's see, I go d4, and he goes knight f6. So I think of this as the Neo-Philidor. He can play e4 here, and this knight can come to d7 or to c6, and it looks like a lot like a Philidor defense with the pawn up there. So that's how I tend to classify this. And my usual response is bishop to d3. But after this game, I'm sort of wondering about this because I didn't really like the position I got out of this game. And well, we'll see what happens in the game. You'll see what I mean. But the main move here, I mean, I haven't really spent a lot of time investigating this position because, as I said, it mainly happens in blitz. I have not seen this in over-the-board play before. So, I haven't spent a lot of time really investigating how I should play against it. But the main move here is knight to c3. And if you play something like g6, he could transpose into a Pirch defense here. I can play f4 and go for the Austrian attack. I guess the thing I didn't like about this was, he might just play e5 here, and in this position I would rather not have the knight here. I'd really like to be able to play c3 here. I mean, the best move is probably knight to f3, and this looks like a kind of a normal position from the Philidor defense, but yeah, this knight is somehow in the way, blocking the c pawn, which is why I have avoided it in the past. But, well, you have to make your choices when you choose your opening lines, and maybe this position would be preferable to the position I ended up in. So I'll try this next time, see how it goes. Anyway, in this game, however, I was following my usual habit of playing bishop d3. He went e5, and he goes c3, and that's the idea of my setup. Is I want the pawn on c3, so if he ever takes on d4, I take back. And then the next move is the one that caught me by surprise. In the past, I've seen moves like bishop to e7 or knight to c6, just developing in typical Philidor style. He had a different idea in mind. He played g6 now. And so this looks more like a King's Indian than it does like any of those other openings with this fianchetto and with my pawns in the center. And now let's see, I can think about different kinds of setups to play against the King's Indian, but I have already gotten away from my usual setup against the King's Indian, which involves the fianchetto of this bishop. So somehow in this particular move order, I have been tricked into playing against the King's Indian in a way that I'm not familiar with. So that's what I mean about not being happy with the results here of the opening. I just continue with knight f3, a normal developing move, and he goes bishop g7. Actually, bishop g7 is a mistake. So let's look at like normal play here. The chess engine, or the opening book, we're still in the opening book, by the way, recommends bringing this knight out to defend the center. There's pressure on the center here. So knight to c6, castles, bishop g7, h3, castles, and rook e1. So yeah, it looks like a normal kind of King's Indian position, except that I have played this pawn to c3 instead of to c4. Normally these pawns would be up here, and maybe this one would be pushed on to d5 in typical kind of classical King's Indian setup. So Anyway, yeah, this is a unusual kind of position, one that I don't really have too much of an idea of, and I don't like playing the kind of classical King's Indian. When you have the pawns up like this, it closes the center, and black can sometimes get a fairly straightforward attack against your king, and the closed center makes it difficult for your pieces to maneuver over and defend, and his advanced pawns take away the space on your king side. So it's just the kind of position. It's not supposed to be bad for white. It's supposed to be okay for white, even good for white, but it's not the kind of position I like to play. And somehow, I've kind of gotten tricked into playing it. And I'm not even playing a regular classical King's Indian because I've wasted time with this c3 move, and normally it would go to c4 in one shot. Anyway, but he made a little mistake here. He played bishop g7, and if you haven't figured out by now, you might want to pause the video and discover why that's a mistake. Okay, I'm giving the answer away now. After he plays bishop g5, I can just take in the center, and this really does win a pawn. Sometimes it doesn't. In the King's Indian, there's often this idea of a discovered attack on this diagonal, getting the material back, but in this particular case it doesn't work. So I can just take here. If he tries to grab this pawn immediately, taking advantage of the discovered attack, I have this queen check. He hasn't castled yet, so the queen check and then picking up the knight also defends my knight. So that comes out good for me. So best for black is to castle, and I castle. And I don't know, my pieces are maybe a little bit fragile here, but this is still pretty decent position for white. Black has compensation, so it's not like he's just down a pawn. Maybe he has a way to get the pawn back now, actually. But anyway, that would have been something that I should have tried. I actually didn't even think about it. Let's see, he played bishop. Oh, it's my move. Let's see, I played here. He played bishop to g7, and I just played h3. I was thinking more about my dark squared bishop, looking for a square for that, and I had eyes on this e3 square as a good square for my bishop, and I just wanted to keep his knight out of the g4 square so he couldn't harass me. It also stops the pin with bishop g4 too. Let's see, so that is okay, although probably taking in the center was better. He goes knight c6, and I go bishop e3. The chess engine already is saying I should play in the standard King's Indian style. I should play with d5, say he moves the knight, and then c4, and just build up that big center. But as I explained, I was still trying to avoid that. It's not the kind of setup I like to play. Let's see, he castled, I castled. Oh, I wanted to mention something too. There's an interesting idea that black has that I hadn't seen before, or maybe I have seen it before, but it's kind of a rare idea. I thought I would share it with you. Black can actually play the move d5 here. It's a little bit strange that black would play d6 and later play d5 and not suffer any consequences from the loss of tempo. But this seems to be actually a good move in this position. I can grab one of these pawns. The chess engine thinks taking on e5 is the best move, and then he can take back again on e4 and force my bishop to move, say bishop to b5, and then castle. It's kind of a funny position with this advanced pawn supported by the knight. Maybe it'll come under pressure, but it's also, there's active pieces that black has, and some open lines, and this pawn might somewhat hinder my development. So anyway, it's an interesting idea that he could actually just play d5 right there. But like I said, he castled, I castled, and then now he, oops, let's back up, I castled, and now he played the move knight to e8. So just continuing with that typical King's Indian plan. Even if I haven't pushed these pawns forward, he's still going to push his f-pawn forward and just try and advance on the king side here. So I went bishop g5. I thought maybe this would slow him down a little bit, but he just went queen to d7. And here I went d5. I guess I finally gave up on finding other ideas here, and figured I just needed to take that space in the center and kick his knight back. there are sometimes it's possible to play a move like g4, but it looks like g4 doesn't work here. I was checking this out with the chess engine, and it likes black after h5, just putting pressure on these pawns here and weakening my king position. So the idea with g4 is to clamp down on this f5 push, but yeah, it doesn't seem to be working in this case. So d5 is an okay move, but not one I was happy to play. And then here's my last strange move from the opening, and this is the one. If I had just played c4 here, the chess engine would thinks that this is still a fine position for white. But again, it's the kind of position that I was trying to avoid. And so I tried this move bishop to c4. The idea is that now if he pushes the f-pawn forward, I can just take it, and this pawn is defended. Also, the other thing I was concerned about here is he pushes, I take, he takes back. He's also got this ready-made threat of pawn to e4, forking my two pieces. So I was trying to deal with two different issues with one move, playing bishop to c4. But after this, actually, the chess engine thinks that black is better. So up to this point, thinks white is doing okay, at least keeping that opening edge. But after this, it starts to like black. So I guess the lesson here is that, maybe there's positions you like and positions you don't like, but sometimes you just have to play them, because if you try too hard to avoid them, you end up with something worse. And that's what happened to me in this opening. So I'm actually just worse here after bishop c4. Let's see, he played h6 to kick my bishop. I traded on e7, and he went, and then I went knight bd2. So I was happy at least to be getting my pieces out. And now he goes f5, which I've been expecting momentarily. So I went ahead and traded. That was my idea, is to just to be able to trade that and reduce the number of pawns over here on the king side. And then I played rook to e1, put some pressure here. I'm thinking there are some tactical ideas here. Maybe the knight can take advantage of the pin, hop into the d4 square, and then come to e6. Right now, I guess he would trade it off, but there's this bishop behind it. I mean, there's some interesting ideas here. Another one that I was thinking about was perhaps there's a possibility of a sacrifice on e5. If he ever has to take back with a pawn, then I can push this pawn forward, and it's a check because of this bishop on c4, and I would actually sort of justify the position of that bishop. And then this pawn would be hitting something on c7 and something on e7 if something was there. So that may be a way to get something, win some material tactically. Anyway, he played queen f7, so just got away from that pin. So that eliminated this knight to d4 idea. But it does put another piece on this light squared diagonal, so I'm still keeping those tactical ideas in mind and trying to figure out ways to intensify the tactics. And I came up with the move queen e2, which probably I'm just being a little too fancy here. The chess engine on the next move says I should move the queen back to d1, so did not like that move. Another possibility would be just to play bishop to b3. That's probably a reasonable thing to do. And there are some tactical ideas here. I could consider a move like knight to c4 as a follow-up, with my queen still protecting this pawn. Say knight to c4, putting more pressure on the e-pawn, and there still might be sacrificial ideas here on e5 with the two knights hitting the e-pawn. So that might be a way to play and to keep some tactics in the position. Queen e2, it just doesn't seem to help my case. He just continues, black just continues his slow build-up towards the king side attack. And yeah, I just didn't like the way the game was shaping up, and I decided to take advantage of this moment. At this moment, the knight has just come and blocked the bishop from the defense of the e-pawn. So I decided to take advantage of this moment and grab that pawn at a time when he has to take back with the pawn. And now, at first, I think I intended to just push here and take advantage of this skewer on the diagonal, but of course he can block with bishop to d3. So, but then I came up, the reason I followed up with this idea was I realized I can just take this pawn, and after I take the pawn, the threat is still kind of hanging here of pushing this pawn forward. And I've also got 2 pawns for my piece. So I thought this combination of picking up 2 pawns for a piece and having some tactical threats, and also his kingside defenses are a little bit worse because he's removed his pawns on the kingside are isolated and he only has 2 of them, so he doesn't have as much pawn cover. So I was thinking this was a decent sacrifice. The chess engine does not agree, and if you want to have another tactical challenge here, there's a specific sequence here that Black found to defend, which was pretty good. So would you, if you want to think about it for a while, pause the video and see if you can find the best way for Black to defend this position. Okay, yeah, pause the video if you want more time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. He started, one thing I had calculated was if the knight tries to grab material with a tempo on my queen, this doesn't work because the queen takes the knight, so that's pretty simple. But he played the interesting move knight to e4, and I think that's a good one. There may have been other good moves too, so if you came up with a different idea, that might be something that works as well. But this is pretty forcing. There's only one move here. My queen is under attack, and this knight is under attack. The knight is undefended, so I have to defend it, and I have to move the queen, and there's only one square that I can move the queen to that defends the knight. So queen f4 is forced, and then he uses his tempo not to trade material, but to drop the knight back and stop me from pushing the d pawn forward and opening up that diagonal, and also threatening just to trade off that bishop. So with that simple maneuver, just a 2-move knight maneuver that was all done with tempo, he's kind of turned the tables. Now when I look at this position, I don't see it as being positive for white. So I guess when I was doing my calculation before making the sacrifice, I missed that idea. So I should have just calculated a little deeper. I looked ahead a few moves, but I did not see that knight maneuver. So yeah, he's kind of taken away a lot of my tactical ideas, and I have to waste a move getting the bishop to safety. I still don't want to give up on that diagonal. And now he starts unwinding. He plays king h8, just getting his king off of that diagonal, and later he can move the queen off, and there's not going to be any threats there anymore. And he's still just up. A piece for 2 pawns. Let's see. I go knight f3. I mean, one thing I got out of this is I did manage to activate my pieces and get some open lines. So there's still some chances here. So I go knight f3. He goes bishop d7. And I went with c4. I went with the idea of pushing these pawns forward and trying to open up this diagonal with tempo. The chess engine likes knight e5 here. I thought about this a little bit, but I didn't like the outcome. Basically, he can take here and sack the h-pawn, so I do get another pawn, but I have to, if I want to get the bishop back, I have to keep trading if I want to get my piece back here. I don't want to go down 2 pieces, and it'll end up in a position like this, where at first I was kind of intrigued by this possibility because I saw that I had rook here check, picking up the bishop, but he can defend by just bringing his rook over, and so I don't get another piece. I'm still 1 piece down. I did get a pawn, but the queens are gone, and I think he can mop up my pawns with his extra piece. So I don't think this is going to turn out well for me. And the chess engine favors black there as well. Just thinks that was maybe one of my best chances. Anyway, I pushed on with c4 here. He went queen to f6. So now the queen is blocking the bishop. I played knight e5 here, so I didn't want to put the knight there when it was going to get traded off, but when it's in this position, he can't afford to trade for it. See, he played rook a to d8, just defending his bishop. The knight was hitting the loose bishop there. And I was starting to worry about this move knight to e4. That would block the defense of my knight and drive me back, and that's also looking like a good square for his knight. So I played f3 to keep his knight out of there. Let's see, he went bishop to c8, so he just dropped his bishop back so I don't have a chance to trade it off. Not that I was going to, but the bishop is very secure there, and it's also holding on to this f-pawn, which is helping to for black to control squares on his king side and hold my attack at bay. So I think that's it was a good decision. And then I went h4. The idea with h4 is I wanted to control this square and keep his queen from coming here and maybe forcing a queen trade. I figure my best chances are to just trying to maneuver my pieces over towards his king and try and avoid trades if at all possible. But he finds a way to provoke a trade. He plays rook f to e1, and he's hitting my knight, and there's 3 attackers and only 2 defenders, and I cannot I cannot bring on another defender. I cannot hold on to that knight, so I have to move it. And also there's problems on this diagonal. Notice this loose pawn here on b2 and the rook behind it. Also, queen could conceivably take that rook off and give up the queen for 2 rooks. So I have to drop the knight back. I went back to d3 to defend on b2. But now that opened up this diagonal for the queen check, and this forced the queen trade. So at this point, my chances are pretty diminished at this point. He takes back. It's even a tempo on my king because that all happened with check. And then he just played b6, and that shuts down my idea. The combination of the bishop here and the pawn here shuts down any idea of pushing my c-pawn forward. So I think he played that part of the game really well. It's kind of funny. His play up to this point, he made mistakes in the opening, played some strange moves, but after I went out of my way to avoid the king's Indian and got a worse position, and then went for that sacrifice, he really refuted it pretty well, and is continuing to play solidly here. Although I really don't understand a lot of his moves, I have to say. Let's see. I went rook a to b1. I guess I was really having trouble finding a move at this point, honestly. So one idea would be to defend this pawn so the knight can move, but he can just trade. I couldn't see any way of avoiding that. And he put the rook here, and I didn't want to give up the e-file, so I traded again. I mean, I'm not entirely opposed to taking the rooks off and just going to the endgame. I may have as much chance there as in any position. I still have the extra 2 pawns, and my king maybe is a little closer to the center if I can activate it. But, well, we'll see what happens with that plan. I start with king g3, and he goes knight f6. And now the natural continuation here would be king to f4, but there's actually a problem with that move. So if you want to think about it for a second, here's another little tactical quiz for you. What's wrong with king to f4? Okay, yeah, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. If I went king f4, he has knight to h5, and that is checkmate. Right in the center of the board. The bishop and the pawn are controlling all of these squares. His bishop is defending that pawn. And let's see, the pawn is controlling that square. The knight is controlling those squares, and this pawn is controlling that square. So he's got that whole box around my king covered, except for this square where my piece is. And so that's a nice mate. So anyway, I spotted that. I didn't play king to f4, but that then raises the question: how am I actually going to get into the game? How am I going to activate my king? If I push this pawn forward, he can just take it. And I can't come back here. The bishop is controlling that square. So this is not a great move, but I played f4 just to give my king a square. But that also gives his knight a square. So knight e4 check, king f3. And now he could just come in here. I was expecting him to come in here with check and take off my bishop, just simplify further. But it's interesting. He played bishop a6. He kept the pieces on and just, I guess he wanted, before it got too simple, to get as many of my pawns as possible. And I think that's a good strategy. If I can trade off pawns, there's drawing ideas, and but if he can start winning pawns from me, then he can eliminate those possibilities of me trading for them. Let's see. So bishop a6, putting a little pressure on here, and now the knight check would actually pick up a pawn. I went king e2 just to get away from that check, but he drops the knight back to d6 there. That also putting pressure on the pawn. In fact, I lose material here. The knight is defending the b pawn against that bishop takes b2, and that's really the only piece that can get over here and defend it. It's doubly attacked. I went knight e5 anyways, thinking, well, maybe he would trade and somehow would try and activate my king. But he didn't. He played the funny move bishop to b7. This is what I mean when I say I didn't understand his moves. I mean, he wasn't just firing these moves out. He was thinking about them, and perhaps he was avoiding some lines that I didn't notice. But, you know, he could have already started grabbing material, and I think he would have been fine. For example, there's nothing wrong with bishop takes b2 or bishop takes e5. You know, I take back with the pawn, and then he can play knight takes c4. Just grab this. That's also good for him. You know, maybe he's avoiding this because he's worried that I'll get a passed pawn here and maybe get some counterplay. So anyway, he's being very cautious here and not giving me any chances. So maybe that's a good way to be. Anyway, bishop b7. It's just that his moves kind of puzzled me when it seemed like other moves were clearly winning. Let's see. So I drop my knight back to d3. I'm defending b2 once again since he didn't take it. Played a5. Maybe he wants to dislodge my bishop, so I play a4 to stop that, and now he moves this bishop back to a6. So that was his idea, just maneuver the bishop to b7 and back so we can push that a pawn forward. Now it's he's going to yeah, now he's got pressure on this pawn again, and I go back to e5. So almost a repetition of the previous position, except that these a pawns have been pushed forward. So at this point he finally decides to cash in. He grabs this pawn on b2, and well, I get my king over to help defend the c pawn. That frees up one of these pieces to move. But now his king starts getting into the game too. See, I tried knight c6. I was having some ideas, maybe knight here to here, check and pick up the c pawn, but played bishop c1. So it looks like he was just spotting all of my threats and dealing with them in advance. Let's see. Oh, we didn't play bishop c8. I'm sorry. He went bishop c1 here. Yeah, just attacking this pawn. So I didn't defend it right away. I went ahead with this knight d8 idea. So if he grabs my pawn, I was still going to check and take this pawn. I was going to give up a pawn over here if I could start taking some of these pawns and maybe mobilize my pawns in the center. And now he goes bishop c8. So I just had the order wrong there. And that stops my knight from coming here. Let's see, I can bring my king forward. I go to d4. He pushes the king back with his bishop b2. I have to drop back, and then he brings his king forward one more step. Let's see, I went knight back to c6 here. I went bishop to c1. I went king to d4. I went forward again. And he could grab this pawn, I think. I haven't bothered to defend it, but I was hoping to push over on this side, and he just stops that. Once again, he doesn't bother to grab the pawn, but he plays knight to b7. So anyway, I think it's kind of interesting the way he's playing here. Something to think about, you know, instead of just grabbing the material right away. First, you make sure your opponent can't do anything. So anyway, I played g3 to defend this pawn. I'd been avoiding that, though, because his knight can come in and harass. Well, all these pawns are on dark squares now, so his bishop or his knight can come in to harass some. Let's see, and he went bishop a3 here. Brought the bishop back around this way. I went knight to e5. I went bishop to c5 check, kicking my king back. So that was his idea of getting around, and then bishop to f2. And yeah, it's getting desperate here. I pushed on with h5. If I had pushed with g4 immediately, he could take the h-pawn. So I'm pushing the h-pawn first. He plays knight to c5 check. He's got the knight coming to a good square too, now that that's vacated by the bishop. I decided to attack his bishop. And let's see, he grabbed a pawn. I was going to lose that pawn anyway, but he grabs the second pawn here. I finally get the bishop, and then he gets my bishop over here. Let's see, I try knight to f3 at this point. He goes knight back to c5. I go knight to d4. I'm looking at putting pressure over here, and maybe also coming in here or here to put pressure on the c-pawn, or to force a trade. You know, I still haven't yet given up. If I can trade off enough pawns, then I can maybe head for some kind of draw. But he played bishop to d7. At this point, I was really just out of ideas. If I let him trade off my last piece, I have nothing left to play with, and he can just mop up my remaining pieces. So my remaining pawns. So I just resigned at this point. Anyway, pretty interesting game, although it was a bit one-sided since I got into such a disadvantage in the opening. But I think there are some lessons there. One is from my side, not letting your fear of playing certain positions force you into worse positions when it comes to the opening. And then secondly, at that key moment when I sacrificed a piece for what I hoped were some tactical threats, and he was able to neutralize it with a 2-move knight maneuver. I think that's a good example of just not calculating deeply enough. So before you play that kind of sacrifice, look ahead at the next couple moves of your opponent to see if he can immediately snuff out your initiative. And then towards the end of the game, I think looking at Black's play, how he played was pretty solid, the way he just didn't allow me to get any counterplay and was able to convert the win. Okay, so after 2 rounds, I'm 0 for 2. So not a good start to this tournament, but round 3 is on another day, and I will be back with round 3 coverage. See you then.